I damn near ended up in jail because my fence crossed into HOA land by 8 freaking inches. 8 inches. And somehow that turned into court dates, threats, and a $40,000 bill with my name on it. You ever build something with your own hands? I don't mean putting together some IKEA bookshelf with an Allen key. I mean really build something, sweat dripping into your eyes, blisters on your palms, that aching satisfaction at the end of the day when you lean on your shovel or wipe off your sawdust-covered jeans and think, yeah, I made this. That was my house. Not the whole thing, to be clear. I didn't lay the foundation or pour the concrete, but everything after closing the deal? That was all me. The deck, the fence, the patio, the shed. Hell, I even redid the gutters and sealed the damn driveway. Every nail, every board, every coat of paint, it's all me. My work, my time, my money. We bought the place in Autumn Hills right after my wife Lisa got her tenured teaching job at the middle school. That was a huge deal for us. I'd been running my own small contracting company for a while. Just me and 2 other guys doing remodels, decks, the occasional roof. Steady work, but we were living tight, scraping together what we could. Then Lisa's job came through, and suddenly we had just enough for a down payment on a small house on a quiet street with too many trees and a whole lot of promise. It was a fixer-upper, no doubt. The yard was overgrown, the paint was old, and the fence out back looked like it had been designed by someone legally blind. But the bones were good, and the neighborhood? It had that suburban peace we thought we wanted. Neighbors waved when you drove by, kids rode bikes in the cul-de-sac, and every other mailbox had a little American flag on it. Felt safe. Felt right. Tyler, our son, he was still little back then, maybe 9 or 10. This was before he got all moody and started hiding in his room with those giant headphones and a sketch pad he never lets anyone see. Back then, he was running around the backyard barefoot, throwing a football to himself and pretending he was in the NFL. That yard, our yard, became the whole world for him. And that did something to me, you know? Made the work feel bigger than just fixing things. That first summer, I tore out the old fence, rotten posts, rusted nails, and slats that crumbled in your hand. I designed a new one, nothing fancy, just a clean wooden privacy fence stained dark cedar. Solid, respectable, the kind of fence that says, we give a damn. Before I did anything, I checked with the HOA, like I was supposed to. Sent in the drawings, filled out the forms, waited 3 weeks. Got the green light in writing, it's stamped and signed. Still got that paper, by the way. Framed it later. Not as a joke, as a warning. At the time, I didn't think twice about it. Put the posts in, double-checked my measurements, even borrowed a buddy's surveyor wheel to make sure I wasn't stepping on anything sacred. There was this little patch of woods behind the house. Trees, brush, a worn-out walking trail that hadn't seen a footstep in years. HOA called it a preserved green zone, like they were protecting the damn Amazon. It looked more like a possum playground, but whatever. I respected the rules, marked everything out, stayed inside the lines. At least I thought I did. Lisa used to bring me lemonade while I worked, not even kidding, like something out of a Hallmark movie. She'd lean on the porch post and laugh when I cussed at a warped board or dropped my hammer for the 5th time. She called it Jack's Therapy Project, and maybe it was. I didn't drink much, didn't golf, didn't hunt, but building stuff? That kept me sane. The fence went up clean, looked sharp, gave us privacy. Gave Sadie, our big, lovable yellow lab, a safe space to chase squirrels and bark at shadows. Tyler even helped stain it. I let him pick the color. He picked something called Chestnut Ember, which sounded ridiculous but honestly looked pretty damn good. The house started to feel like ours. Not just because we paid for it, though trust me, the mortgage checks were painful, but because we'd made it into something real. We carved our names into one of the fence posts out back, just small and low enough that you had to know where to look. It felt symbolic, I guess. Like planting a flag. That's what made everything that came next so hard to swallow. Because when someone tries to rip away something you built with your bare hands, not just physically but emotionally, it doesn't feel like a fine. It feels like a gut punch. I didn't know it at the time, but that fence, that 8-inch mistake, was going to turn my entire life upside down. And the people who did it? They didn't knock on my door. They didn't talk to me. They started with a letter. A stupid, smug little letter. And it only got worse from there. I remember the day that letter showed up like it was branded into my memory. It came in one of those stiff white HOA envelopes with the window in the front, the kind that always looks official and annoying at the same time. At first, I thought it was another schedule for some community cleanup day or an announcement about the damn pool hours. You know, the kind of stuff nobody reads unless it affects them directly. But then I saw the bold red lettering across the top. Notice of encroachment. Right there, capital letters. like I was being accused of building a meth lab behind my house instead of a privacy fence. I opened it standing by the mailbox in flip-flops and with Sadie tugging on the leash, ready for her walk. I scanned it once, then again, slower. Apparently, the back edge of my fence, the part that ran along the trees, had crossed into the protected common use zone, an environmentally preserved area under HOA jurisdiction. Their words, not mine. I just stood there, blinking at it, like, wait, what? I read that thing 3 times before I realized what they were actually saying. They were claiming my fence was over the line. Not the property line, mind you. Not like I'd built into someone else's yard or onto a sidewalk. No. They were talking about some buffer zone behind the houses that technically belonged to the HOA but had never, as far as I could tell, been used for anything except overgrown weeds, poison ivy, and the occasional deer taking a dump. It said I was to remove the encroachment immediately or face further enforcement action as outlined in the HOA's governing documents. I swear I laughed out loud right there in the middle of the street, loud enough for Old Man Jenkins across the way to look over and raise an eyebrow. I waved the letter at him like, get a load of this shit. At first, it didn't even seem like a big deal. Just another overreach from a bunch of retirees with too much free time and a god complex. I'd dealt with little HOA nonsense before. Emails about my trash can being visible from the road, or one time they left a warning on my truck because I parked facing the wrong direction. Little stuff. Annoying but harmless. But this felt different. It wasn't just the tone of the letter or the ridiculousness of it. It was the precision. Like someone had gone out there with a tape measure and a grudge. I walked the line of my fence that afternoon just to humor myself. Brought my own tape, even dragged out the copy of my property survey. If there was an issue, it couldn't have been more than a few inches. And that was being generous. 8 inches. That's what it turned out to be later. 8 stupid, irrelevant inches over some invisible line in the woods. Back then, though, it was just a letter. No one knocked on my door, no one called. It didn't feel like war yet. It felt like an annoying mosquito buzzing in my ear. I figured I'd send them a copy of the survey, maybe a photo or 2, and it'd be over in a week. Maybe 2. Lisa didn't even take it seriously. She laughed when I told her, said something like, well, what's next? Are they going to start measuring how loud Sadie barks? But that's the thing about these people, it always starts small, real quiet, like a hairline crack in your windshield. You ignore it, drive to work like normal, and next thing you know, it's spread the length of the glass and your whole damn windshield's about to give out. That letter, it wasn't just a heads up, it was a test, and I failed it, because I treated it like it was nothing. And Dean Radcliffe, he was just getting warmed up. The next letter came a couple weeks later. Same envelope, same smug font, same gut punch. Only this time, it wasn't just a, hey, we noticed your fence might be flirting with the tree line. This one had teeth. It was an official notice of violation, and they weren't asking anymore. They were demanding. The language had changed, too. All legal and cold. Failure to comply with corrective action will result in daily fines of $25 retroactive to the date of initial notification. They even had a running total printed at the bottom like it was a grocery receipt. At that point, just over $3,000. I remember staring at the number like I was reading it wrong. Lisa leaned over my shoulder and said, wait, are they seriously fining us already? You didn't even get a hearing or anything? Nope, no hearing, no phone call, no knock on the door. Just the HOA tightening the screws like I was some criminal squatter. I didn't even know who was behind it at first. It's not like these letters came with a friendly signature. They were just stamped with the HOA seal like some kind of bureaucratic mafia note. But later I started piecing things together. Word around the neighborhood was that Dean Radcliffe, the HOA president, had made some comment at the last meeting about setting a precedent, about holding the line on encroachments. That kind of thing. Someone said he even brought up my name without using it, called me a contractor who thinks he's above the rules. Real subtle, Dean. Thing is, I wasn't trying to fight anybody. Not then. I thought it was a misunderstanding. I thought I could talk to someone like an adult and fix it. So I wrote them a letter, polite, respectful, even included a copy of the original HOA approval for the fence, signed and dated. I attached photos. I offered to meet in person and go over the measurements with anyone they wanted. Silence. Not even a generic response, just nothing. Then came the notice of legal action. HOA versus Jack Monroe. I opened that envelope at the kitchen table while Lisa was making dinner. I didn't even say anything for a minute, just held it in my hands like it was radioactive. She looked over at me, and when our eyes met, I could see the shift. That little flicker of fear behind the usual calm. Lisa's a rock, stronger than me in a lot of ways, but that letter cracked something. "They're suing you?" she asked. "Not us, not the family, you, like I'd done something wrong." I didn't blame her. I felt the same way. The court date was set. I didn't have a lawyer. I couldn't afford one. I figured I'd go in there, tell the truth, show my paperwork, explain that it was a few inches over the line and that I'd already offered to adjust it if needed. Simple, right? I got my ass handed to me. Dean showed up with a real attorney, some guy with slicked back hair and a briefcase that probably cost more than my entire lawnmower setup. His name was Scott Silverman, and he talked like every word came with a billable hour. The way he spun it, you'd think I'd bulldozed a national monument. He pointed to satellite photos and dragged out every technicality in the HOA charter like it was the Constitution. I tried to speak up, said I had written approval, said I measured, said I built the damn thing myself, but none of it mattered. Not to the judge, not to the system. The ruling came fast and hard. I had to move the fence. And not just the back portion, the whole thing, since the judge said the violation compromised the integrity of the structure. I had to pay the daily fines backdated to the original notice, plus court costs. Just shy of $7,000. I walked out of that courthouse feeling like someone had shoved me down a flight of stairs. Lisa didn't say a word in the car. Tyler didn't even look up from his phone when I came in. And me? I just sat on the edge of the bathtub that night and stared at the floor. I tore the fence down the next weekend, every damn panel, every post. Sadie sat there in the yard, confused, watching as I undid the thing I'd spent weeks building. I didn't talk, didn't even cuss. Just took it all apart, dragged it to the side yard, and stared at the empty dirt. And then, like a kick while I was down, I got another letter. Your property remains in violation. Apparently the new position of the fence was still too close to the preservation zone. This time, they claimed it was within 6 inches of intrusion. I swear I could have snapped something in half. I called the HOA, asked to speak with someone directly, anyone, and got routed to voicemail. I left a message, then another, no callback, nothing. I emailed, nothing. It was like screaming into a canyon. Meanwhile, the fines kept coming. They tacked on more court fees, more penalties, even included the HOA's legal costs. By the time the second hearing rolled around, they said I owed $22,200 in fines and another $17,600 in attorney's fees. That's nearly $40,000 over a backyard fence. I couldn't sleep. I started drinking more than I should have. Tyler barely spoke to me. Lisa was trying to keep us all above water, but I could see her cracking too. One night she sat on the couch holding the latest HOA letter in her lap and just said, "I don't know how much more of this I can do, Jack." And I didn't either. That yard used to feel like peace. Now it felt like a prison. And every day Dean Radcliffe and his little army of clipboard crusaders were making sure the walls were closing in. There's this thing that happens when you're in a fight you didn't start, especially one that starts swallowing your whole life, where you hit a point and think, okay, this has to be a mistake. Someone's going to realize it. Someone's going to step in and fix it. That's where I was, somewhere between denial and desperation, and I still believed, stupidly, that if I just followed the process, if I just made the right calls, knocked on the right doors, someone with a brain and a shred of decency would look at the whole mess and say, yeah, this is ridiculous. Let's fix it. So I tried. I really tried. First thing I did was go down to the county zoning office, figured I'd talk to someone who actually knew about landlines, setbacks, whatever they called it, not just HOA people making rules in their kitchens with a bottle of Merlot and a ruler. The lady behind the desk looked at me like I was trying to order a pizza. She pulled up a parcel map on her screen, one of those grainy things with faint yellow outlines, squinted at it, tapped a few times, and said, "Well, the HOA controls that buffer zone, so your fence being near it, yeah, technically they can enforce whatever rules they've written in their covenant." I asked if I could get someone to come out and physically measure it. She said, "We don't really do that. That's a civil issue." Civil issue. That phrase would come back to haunt me. Next, I tried calling the HOA management company. They're supposed to be neutral, a third party hired to handle the admin work, enforce the covenants, make sure things run smooth. Yeah, no, turns out they were about as neutral as a referee who went to high school with one of the teams. I got bounced between 3 different people before I ended up on the phone with some guy named Aaron who sounded like he was answering calls from a Taco Bell drive-thru. I explained everything, calmly, the original approval, the confusion over the measurements, the fact that I'd already rebuilt the fence. He said he'd look into it and get back to me. He never did. I left 2 more voicemails, sent 4 emails, nothing. Just more fine notices showing up in the mail like clockwork. The number kept climbing, like watching a slot machine spin in reverse. Except instead of winning, I was bleeding out slowly. I started keeping a folder, a real one. Manila, overstuffed with everything from the original approval letter to copies of my email threads, court papers, survey maps, photos of the fence from every angle. I even printed out the HOA's own rules, highlighted the part where it said violations required written notice, a response period, and an opportunity to appeal before fines could begin, all of which they'd skipped like it was optional reading. That's when I started reaching out to lawyers. You ever try to get legal help when you don't have $5,000 sitting around? Good luck. Most of them won't even talk to you unless you pay a consultation fee the size of a car payment. And the ones who do talk, they either tell you the fight isn't worth it or that it'll take years to resolve and cost more than the fines themselves. One guy, a soft-spoken attorney who mostly did real estate closings, told me, and I quote, "The HOA always wins. They write the rules, and the courts treat it like a contract you signed the day you bought the place." I didn't even respond. I just stood up, thanked him, and walked out. Not because he was wrong, but because hearing it out loud made me feel physically sick. Lisa tried to help too. She called a legal aid group that worked with homeowners and got me a phone appointment with a pro bono paralegal. The woman was kind, took down all the details, and even asked me to scan and send some of the documents. I did, all of them. She never responded again. No idea what happened. At one point, I even wrote a letter to the Maryland Attorney General's office. Real letter, printed, signed. I explained what was happening, the violations, the skipped procedures, the ridiculous escalation. I asked, begged really for guidance or intervention, or at least a referral. All I got back was a form letter that said something like, "We appreciate your concern, but our office does not typically intervene in HOA disputes unless they involve criminal behavior." Criminal behavior. Not abuse of power, not financial strangulation. I guess in their eyes, unless someone was lighting the fence on fire or stabbing people in the street, it didn't count. And meanwhile, I was losing more than money. I was losing sleep, losing my patience, losing my grip. Lisa started walking around the house with this tightness in her jaw, like she was constantly biting down on something she couldn't say. She stopped asking me about the mail. Tyler barely looked up from his sketch pad anymore. He used to show me stuff, weird sci-fi drawings with laser cannons and lizard people, but now he'd just pull the paper close whenever I came into the room. One night, Lisa sat across from me at the kitchen table, just the two of us, cold, leftover spaghetti between us, and said, "Maybe we should just pay it, take a loan, refinance, something." I didn't even answer at first. I was too busy grinding my molars into powder. Because the thing is, it wasn't just about the money. It was the principle, the process, the fact that I followed the rules, did everything right, and still got steamrolled. It was about the silence, the way no one would answer the phone, the way Radcliffe smirked at the last HOA meeting like he'd already won, the way people started crossing the street to avoid me like this mess was contagious. I wasn't looking for a fight. I wasn't trying to burn the place down. I just wanted someone to do the damn right thing. But nobody would, and every door I knocked on, it stayed shut. Real tight. I'd just about given up when it happened. Not the dramatic kind of giving up, not packing boxes or calling moving trucks, more like that quiet kind, where you just stop caring. I was still opening the HOA letters, still writing down the amounts they said I owed, still tossing them into the folder that had grown thick and mean-looking. But something in me had shut off. I stopped fighting, stopped hoping. The fire was out. And then, this one morning, I open the mailbox and see this envelope. No return address. No HOA logo. Just plain white, sealed sloppy, no postage. Someone had hand-delivered it. I stood there in the driveway for a second, just looking at it. You ever have that moment where your gut tells you something important is about to happen? My hands were dirty. I'd just finished power washing the side of the house, and I almost waited to open it, but something told me nope, right now. So I did. Inside was a copy of the HOA's covenant declaration, the whole rulebook, but half of it was highlighted in yellow. And I mean specific, not just a few sections here and there, but laser-focused paragraphs. Stuff about violation notices, time frames, due process, fine structures. Attached to the back was a printed page, typed out in all caps, and at the top it said, "They never followed protocol." Read Section 8C and 9F. They skipped mandatory notice procedures. You have grounds to appeal? No signature? Nothing else. Just those words. I read that thing 5 times in a row, standing right there by the mailbox, mouth dry, heart pounding like I'd just run a sprint. And here's the crazy part. I knew it was right. I didn't even need to double check. I remembered reading that section when I printed it all out weeks ago. I just didn't fully see it back then. I was too buried in the avalanche to recognize what I was holding. Section 8C, right there in the HOA covenant. It clearly said that any alleged violation must be accompanied by written notice giving the homeowner 30 calendar days to respond before fines can be imposed. And Section 9F, it said that homeowners were entitled to a formal hearing upon written request, and that no financial penalties could be enforced without offering that hearing opportunity in writing, which they never did, not once, not in the first letter, not in the second, not during the first court hearing. They just hit the gas and ran me over. It hit me like a lightning bolt. They'd broken their own damn rules. All their power, all the threats, the money they were demanding, all of it rested on the idea that I had broken their rules. But they were the ones who skipped steps, quietly, on purpose, banking on the fact that I wouldn't notice or wouldn't know what to do if I did. And here's what sealed it. Whoever left that envelope, they'd been at those meetings. They knew what happened behind those closed HOA doors. The way they highlighted specific points, the tone of that note. That wasn't just some good Samaritan with a printer and a conscience. This was someone inside. I had no idea who. Still don't, to this day. But in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not rage, not panic, hope. Real, grounded, dangerous hope. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving. I was calculating. Because now I had something stronger than frustration or anger. I had leverage. I walked back inside, still holding the papers, my hands shaking a little. Lisa was in the kitchen grading papers. She looked up when I came in and saw my face. "What?" she asked. "What happened?" And I just said, "They screwed up. They screwed up bad." She stood up slowly like she wasn't sure whether to get excited or scared. "You sure?" I dropped the papers on the counter. "They violated their own damn bylaws, and if I can prove it, I think we can burn the whole thing down." She didn't smile, not yet, but she nodded, and that meant everything. That night, I poured myself a bourbon, pulled out every single document I had, and started building the case. The war wasn't over, but the tide, it had just turned. I didn't sleep that night, not a minute. I lay there with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling fan and listening to the soft hum of it spinning like it was counting down to something. My brain wouldn't shut off. Every piece of paper in that manila folder was now a puzzle piece, and I wasn't trying to survive anymore. I was building something, a counterattack. The next morning, before the sun was even up, I made a pot of coffee strong enough to power a small boat and spread everything out on the kitchen table like I was trying to solve a murder. I had the HOA covenant, the violation letters, the hearing notices, or rather, the lack of hearing notices, photos of the fence before and after, my original approval form, timestamps, emails, you name it. It looked like the aftermath of a paranoid conspiracy theorist's garage, but there was a method in the madness. I was done being the guy who reacted to things. This time, I was going to set the tempo. I needed help, though. Real help. Not some bored county clerk or a legal aid office that ghosted me after one phone call. I needed someone who actually knew how to fight these people, who wanted to fight them. That's how I found Jessica Blumberg. A friend of mine, Eddie, one of the guys I used to do contractor work with, gave me her name, said she helped his cousin with a zoning nightmare a few towns over and was like a pit bull with a JD. That was all I needed to hear. I called her office and left a message that probably sounded more like a plea than a consultation request. She called back that afternoon. She had this voice, sharp, confident, like someone who didn't mess around. Not rude, just clipped. Efficient. I told her what was going on. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I laid it all out. The fence, the approval, the fines, the court, the anonymous envelope. Everything. I half expected her to sigh or say she didn't handle HOA cases. Instead, there was a pause. Then she said, "I want to see the paperwork." I sent her scans of everything within the hour. By the next morning, we were on Zoom. She looked exactly how I imagined. Glasses perched low on her nose, messy bun, legal pad stacked behind her, and this calm intensity that made me sit up straighter without thinking about it. "First off," she said, flipping through my scanned docs, "they broke procedure, flat out. You never got a formal violation hearing offer? No mailed notice of right to appeal? Nothing signed?" "Nothing," I said. "Not a word." She smiled, not a happy smile, more like someone spotting blood in the water. "Well, Jack, that's your shot." She explained everything. The HOA's own covenant functioned like a contract, and by violating their own outlined enforcement steps, they'd not only overreached, they'd voided the entire basis for the fines. No warning letter with a proper timeline, no chance to respond or fix the issue before assessing penalties. That was breach of contract, plain and simple. But we'd need more than just the covenant. We'd need a timeline, documentation, and something she called a pattern of enforcement abuse, which sounded intense but made perfect sense the more she explained it. It wasn't enough to show they messed up once. We needed to show they routinely bent their own rules when it suited them, and that I had become the target of that abuse. That's where things started clicking. I told her about Daryl Kane, one of the board members who used to be friendly with me but had gone quiet after all this started. I had a gut feeling about him, and I told her about Angela Prescott, the neighbor 2 doors down, widowed, kept to herself. I remembered her saying something months ago about Dean steamrolling decisions and skipping votes in closed sessions. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Now it felt like gold. Jessica leaned in and said, "If we can get someone inside to admit the board bypassed formal votes or decisions, that could blow this thing wide open. That's your pattern of abuse. That's how we prove this wasn't a clerical mistake. It was deliberate." So that became the plan. I'd start by reaching out to Daryl, carefully, see if I could get him to talk. Even off the record, he wasn't a bad guy, just seemed worn out and uncomfortable lately, like someone who didn't like the game anymore but couldn't find the exit. Jessica would draft a formal appeal to the Maryland Court of Special Appeals, not just to reverse the judgment, but to challenge the entire process. She said we'd include the covenant violations, the lack of notice, the anonymous tip, the timeline of fine increases, and the fact that I was financially and emotionally steamrolled without ever being given a real voice. But before that could happen, we had to gather real evidence. Witnesses, meeting minutes, any sign that the HOA didn't follow its own governance rules. She warned me it wouldn't be quick, that these things dragged out, that the appeal court might not even hear us for months, and that in the meantime the HOA could keep trying to collect, maybe even escalate. "I don't care," I told her. "I'm in." And I meant it. The strange thing was, I didn't feel scared anymore. Tired, yeah. Bitter, absolutely. But scared? No. Not with Jessica on board. Not with that envelope in my hands and the paper trail stacking up against Dean and his little power club. I went out that evening and looked at the yard, the rebuilt fence, the half-dead patch of grass where Sadie used to lay before I tore it all up. I walked over to the corner post, the one I'd carved our initials into real low where only I knew it was there, and I ran my fingers over it. That was mine. All of it. And I wasn't going to let them take it. Not anymore. I finally had something to fight with. And this time, I wasn't swinging in the dark. It started with a knock. Not the metaphorical kind. I mean a literal knock on Daryl Kane's door. I stood there with a pit in my stomach and a half smile I didn't feel, holding a 6-pack of the cheap craft beer I knew he liked because we'd worked a charity barbecue together once years ago, back before all this HOA nonsense turned us into distant satellites in the same cul-de-sac. Daryl answered the door like he was expecting a political canvasser or someone trying to sell him gutters. His eyes flicked to the beer in my hand, then to me, then back to the beer. "I don't want trouble," he said. First thing out of his mouth. Not hey, not what's up, not even Jack, man, this whole thing sucks. Just that. I don't want trouble. Neither do I told him, but I think we're already in it. He didn't let me in, just stepped outside and closed the door behind him. We stood there on his front porch while I laid it out. I told him I knew about the skipped hearings, about the violation of the covenants. I told him I had the covenant sections highlighted, the letters, the documentation, the whole damn mountain. I even told him I had legal representation now, which seemed to put a visible dent in his composure. And then I said it. "I just need the truth. Off the record, man. I'm not asking you to go on camera. I just need to know. Did Dean ever push those fines through without a vote?" Daryl looked at the sidewalk like he was trying to count the cracks. "He never asked us to vote on yours," he finally said, voice low. He brought it up in passing, said it was already handled, said it wasn't worth the discussion, that the structure was illegal and we'd approved enforcement action, but we never did, not formally. Boom. He didn't even realize it, but that was it. That was the crack in the foundation. I thanked him, didn't push him for more. I left the beer on his porch even though I knew he wouldn't touch it until after dark. A man still trying to convince himself he didn't take a side. Back home, I told Jessica everything. Her voice practically buzzed through the phone. "That's witness 1, she said. "We'll keep it confidential unless we have to subpoena. You just opened a door, Jack." Next was Angela Prescott. That one took a little finesse. She wasn't the kind of person you just showed up on, not unless you wanted to be met with a firmly closed curtain. So I wrote her a letter. Handwritten, old school. Told her what was happening. Told her I remembered what she said about Dean and how he didn't like to wait for votes. I asked her if she'd be willing to talk to someone. Confidential, no names. She came over 2 days later, knocked once, real soft, and said, "You're not wrong, Jack, and I'll say what I saw." She was in the room when they discussed enforcement options on my fence. No vote, no quorum, no notice given after. Just a closed-door session that ended with Dean instructing the management company to move forward with penalties. like he was a damn dictator. I passed everything to Jessica: statements, notes, timeline. We even got a few of the HOA's own email threads through a resident who forwarded us a PDF of a newsletter draft where Dean casually referred to my non-compliance being under enforcement, even though the board hadn't formally met that month. Then we filed the appeal. It was a clean shot, a direct hit at the foundation of the HOA's case. Jessica laid it out like a crime scene, point by point: the lack of hearing notice, the absence of formal violation notification, the skipping of the 30-day response window, the unauthorized fine schedule, and most importantly, the internal process. Violations that breached the covenant agreement and made the entire legal action against me void. But of course, the moment the HOA got wind of the appeal, they tried to play offense again. I started getting letters from their attorney, Scott Silverman. This guy had the kind of tone that makes you want to punch a wall. His letters were all condescension and thinly veiled threats. Things like further litigation may result in liens against your property, and we advise your counsel to consider the consequences of challenging well-established authority. Jessica practically laughed reading them. "They're scared," she said. "They don't send this kind of noise unless they feel the walls wobble." Still, I wasn't bulletproof. The stress didn't magically go away. HOA meetings started to feel colder. Neighbors who used to wave now suddenly forgot how. I caught Dean staring at me from across the room once, arms folded, face flat, and I knew he'd gotten the message. He just didn't know what I was holding in my hand. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Jessica had already gotten a response from the Court of Special Appeals. They'd agreed to hear the case. That changed everything. Now it was a real fight, a public one, on record. Not just me trying to survive, but me holding them accountable. And then Dean made the mistake that sealed it. He sent a new violation notice. After all this, after we'd filed the appeal, claimed that my trash cans were visible from the street, that I'd violated section something about obstructing visual uniformity. It was petty, stupid, but also a gift. Jessica added it to the case, said it proved retaliation, that after the fence issue was under legal challenge, they attempted to pressure and harass me with unrelated and selectively enforced violations. She pulled records from other residents with visible cans, none of whom had received notices. She even got one of them to write a sworn statement. This time, we weren't just playing defense, we were ripping up the turf under their feet. Dean tried to tighten his grip, but it only made the cracks show, and I could feel it shifting. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, the HOA wasn't in control. I was. You ever feel a room shift before anyone says a word? That's what it felt like when we walked into that courthouse for the appeal. Not the big county one from before, where they rammed the original judgment down my throat. This was higher. The Maryland Court of Special Appeals. Different building, different tone, same fear boiling under my ribs. I was wearing the only suit I owned, a navy thing I bought years ago for my brother's wedding and hadn't touched since. Felt tight across the shoulders, but maybe that was just nerves. Lisa squeezed my hand right before we walked through security. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Jessica met us there with her usual controlled fire. She had this manila folder under her arm, thick as a phone book, and a look on her face like she knew we weren't just walking into a courtroom. We were walking into a reckoning. The room itself wasn't dramatic. No gavel banging, no Law and Order theme music, just high ceilings, wood paneling, and a panel of 3 judges who looked like they'd seen 1,000 cases and didn't care about the drama unless it came with receipts. Good thing we had plenty. Jessica opened with calm, confident clarity. She walked them through the timeline: the original approval, the first letter, the absence of proper notice, the fines, the lack of a hearing opportunity. She hit every section of the HOA's own covenant like a surgeon. And when she got to the violation of sections 8C and 9F, she didn't just recite the rules, she showed how they broke them. Then she brought up the internal process violations, the skipped votes, the testimonies, the evidence of retaliatory behavior, including the brand new trash can violation that came right after we filed the appeal. Scott Silverman was there too, looking like someone had swapped out his confidence for caffeine and flop sweat. He tried to keep his cool, talked about precedent, about enforcement rights, about the sanctity of HOA governance, but it was obvious. The judges weren't buying it. They kept interrupting him, asking for dates, for documents, for specifics he couldn't give. At one point, one of them leaned forward and said, "So, Mr. Silverman, are you stating for the record that the homeowner was provided a formal opportunity to respond to the initial violation before fines were assessed?" Long pause, then, "Not in a formal hearing sense, no." That was it. Right there. That was the moment. The air in the courtroom got thick. I saw one of the judges tilt her head like she was already writing the opinion in her mind. After it was over, we stepped out into the hallway and Jessica just said, "We're good." That's all. No cheer, no big celebration. Just fact. She was that sure. And a few weeks later, it became official. The ruling came down in writing. I still have a framed copy in my office. The court found that the HOA had violated its own procedures, including failure to provide proper notice, failure to allow a response period, and failure to offer a formal hearing as required under their governing documents. All fines were vacated. All fees rescinded. The HOA was ordered to pay the entirety of my legal costs. I read it once, then twice, then I sat back and just stared at the wall for maybe 10 minutes. Lisa cried. Tyler came out of his room. He'd been following the case more than I realized, and gave me the first real hug in months. And then came the fallout. Word spread like wildfire through Autumn Hills. The appeal ruling went around in email threads, in HOA meeting notes, even on the Nextdoor app where people usually just complain about dog poop and fireworks. Dean Radcliffe didn't say a word publicly for a while. He skipped the next 2 HOA meetings. Then came the announcement, Dean Radcliffe has stepped down from his position as HOA president to focus on personal matters. A new board was formed. Daryl got elected president. He called me personally, nervous, awkward, and said he hoped we could turn a new page. I told him I didn't run for office and had no intention to, but I appreciated the call. The local paper picked up the story. Some piece titled, HOA Oversteps, Homeowner Fights Back and Wins. They asked if I wanted to be interviewed. I said no. I didn't want my face in the paper. I wasn't doing this to be famous. I just wanted my life back. But here's the best part. A month after the ruling, I got a letter from the HOA. Not a violation. Not a fine. Just 1 page. Typed. It said that they were reviewing all internal enforcement policies and would be attending training sessions on due process and homeowner rights. I almost laughed. Too little, too late? But still, I'll take the win. Lisa and I sat out on the porch that night with a bottle of wine. First time we'd done that in a long while. We watched the sun go down behind the houses. Same view as always, but it felt different now. Like I'd earned the peace in it. I never thought you'd actually take them down, she said. I smiled. Me neither, but once they pushed me far enough, I wasn't going to stop. And I meant that. I didn't burn anything down. I didn't scream or rage or throw fists. I did something way worse. I proved them wrong, in front of everyone, and I made them pay for it. Funny thing is, life mostly went back to normal. Well, mostly. The grass still needs mowing, Sadie still barks at the Amazon guy like he owes her money, and Lisa still leaves her coffee cups on top of the dryer for reasons I'll never understand. Tyler's applying to colleges now. He wants to study design, says he might do architecture, but I catch him sketching weird creatures and spaceships when he thinks no one's looking. Guess we'll see where that lands. The fence is still standing. Sturdy, quiet. It's been pressure washed, re-stained, even got a little solar light on the corner post now. I put it there the week after the ruling came down. No ceremony, just me and a screwdriver and a pocket knife to cut the plastic. It glows soft and warm when the sun goes down. I like to think of it as a tiny little victory torch. I still get the HOA mail, of course. Newsletters, updates, some painfully bland apology about recent legal restructuring and new procedural oversight. It's like they're trying really hard to sound like they've learned something without actually saying what. I've skimmed the minutes from a few meetings since. Daryl's president now, and from what I hear, he's doing a decent job. Even brought in a third-party auditor to look at past enforcement cases. Word is a couple other homeowners got their fines reversed too. Quietly, no big announcements. Sometimes I think about writing a letter to Dean. Not to gloat, just to say, you could have avoided all of this by walking 30 feet and having a conversation with me. But then I remember the look on his face in that courtroom when the judge started listing off everything they'd done wrong. That's probably enough. There are still neighbors who avoid eye contact. That's fine. I'm not looking for a parade. I didn't fight that battle to make friends. I fought it to keep what's mine. But there are others, newer folks, who stop me on walks. Say they heard about that fence case and thank me. Some just nod like they get it, like they've had their own versions of it in one form or another. Lisa's different now, too. I think she saw something in me during all this that she hadn't seen in a while, or maybe that I hadn't seen in a while. Resilience, maybe? Or just plain stubbornness. We don't talk about it much, but every now and then she'll touch my hand when I'm not expecting it and say, "You did the right thing." And I know exactly what she means. And me? I'm good. I'm not angry anymore. I don't wake up with my jaw clenched or pace around thinking about lawsuits. I'm back to building things, real things. I fixed up the shed out back, finally added the overhang I'd been meaning to do for years. Feels good, using my hands again for something that isn't defensive. The truth is, the fight changed me. Not in some dramatic Hollywood way. I'm still me, still forget where I put my keys, and still cuss when I stub my toe. But it hardened something. Not bitterness. Just a spine. A line in the dirt I didn't even know I had until someone tried to step over it. I think about that sometimes, how it all started with 8 inches of fence and turned into a storm that nearly wiped me out. And how in the end it wasn't the lawyers or the judges or even the documents that saved me. It was the simple decision to keep standing when everything in me wanted to fold. So, yeah, the fence is still there, the house still stands, and so do I, right where I've always belonged.